Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my week number 10 must-start and must-sit wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. And if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. I would also like to ask that if you have any questions about week number 10, to leave them down below in the comment section or in the Discord linked in the video description and in the pinned comment. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 10 must start and must sit wide receivers. We begin with my must-start wide receivers of the week, headlined by Juju Smith-Schuster of the Kansas City Chiefs, going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars on Sunday. Currently on the season in half PPR points per game, Juju Smith-Schuster is the wide receiver number 25, and he has been on a hot streak over his last 3 games, averaging 18.5 half PPR points per game, and he was the wide receiver number 15 in half PPR last week up against the Tennessee Titans in prime time. In that game, he had 10 receptions on 12 targets for 88 yards, and this week his matchup up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jaguars ranked 27th in pass DVOA, so this is going to be an incredibly easy matchup for Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, I was someone who was nervous about Juju going into the season, and early on the season, my nervousness was proved to be correct because he wasn't the clear number 1 wide receiver. Mahomes was throwing the ball to these other guys. He was feeding Travis Kelce, and Juju was kind of just left in the dust. But recently, we've started to see Patrick Mahomes force feed the ball to Juju Smith-Schuster, and Juju has played incredible. This is the best football we have seen Juju Smith-Schuster play in what feels like years. So Juju up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The defense has been very hit or miss this season, a rocking fucking roller coaster up and down. Some weeks they look great, some weeks they look awful. I think up against the Kansas City Chiefs, ultimately they stand no chance, and I think Juju Smith-Schuster has a big spot here. My next must-start wide receiver is Joshua Palmer of the LA Chargers, going up against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. Currently, he is the wide receiver number 45 in half PPR points per game, but the fact that he's wide receiver 45 does not really change my opinion on Joshua Palmer. Mike Williams is out of this game for sure and will be out for the foreseeable future. It seems like initially they said a couple of weeks, 4 or 5 weeks maybe, for Mike Williams, but based upon the injury that he has and based upon what I've read, it seems like it's going to end up being a little bit longer than that. And according to head coach Brandon Staley, Keenan Allen is day-to-day with his hamstring injury. This guy has been absolutely fucking miserable to have drafted this season. Keenan Allen has been out for what feels like the whole entire season, and based upon that quote, saying he's day-to-day after it seemed like he was going to potentially come back last week tells me that there is no way in fuck that Keenan Allen's playing in this game. I understand the matchup is not ideal up against the 49ers. At a point in this season, the 49ers defense was decimated by injuries, but they've continued to get more and more healthy, and they do look like one of the better defenses in the NFL. But since there are really no weapons in LA with the Chargers, and I feel like Justin Herbert, the pervert, is going to try to claw his way back on into this game late when they are down, I do think Joshua Palmer has a ton of upside. Last week up against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta, wide receiver 11 in half PPR, 8 receptions on 10 targets for 106 yards. Do I expect him to be wide receiver number 11 again up against the 49ers? No, I do not, but I do believe that Joshua Palmer has insane upside as the number 1 receiver in LA with the Chargers. Justin Herbert has not looked the best this season, obviously, since he suffered that injury, but he's still a good enough quarterback for this game to be competitive, even if the Chargers get down in this game. And I think Joshua Palmer, again, despite the matchup not being the best, will end up being very solid for fantasy this week. Next up, we move to George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers, going up against the New Orleans Saints at home in Pittsburgh. He's currently the wide receiver 63 in half PPR points per game on the season, and now without Chase Claypool, my confidence in George Pickens has reached the maximum. It has risen all the way to the top. Now, a lot of people don't have George Pickens ranked inside the top 30, the top 32, even the top 36 on the week, but I am very confident that he will smash the top 30 wide receiver spots. He is going to be a weapon in this matchup up against the New Orleans Saints. His last game prior to the bye, they had a bye last week, was up against the Eagles, and he shit the bed in that game. I'll keep it a buck with you. I'll keep it 100. He had 3 targets for 0 receptions, right? He has a bad game. But at the end of the day, that was up against, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best defense in the National Football League in the Philadelphia Eagles. So even going into that game, I was definitely nervous about George Pickens. Now he gets the Saints. We've seen the Saints defense be very confusing this season. They're a lot like the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're seeing great games out of the Saints defense, and then the next week, you just see them look like they have no idea what they're fucking doing at all. Like last week, they get absolutely bulldozed by the Baltimore Ravens, but they've played games this year where if they went up against the Ravens that week, the defense would have absolutely locked Lamar Jackson down. So this defense is a little bit confusing, but again, without Chase Claypool there, that takes away one more target for Kenny Pickett to feed the ball to. And prior to that down game up against the Philadelphia Eagles was week 7 in primetime up against the Miami Dolphins in Miami, where he had 6 receptions on 6 targets for 61 yards and a touchdown. I think we see a bounce back spot for George Pickens this week up against the New Orleans Saints. Now we'll pivot to my must-sit wide receivers of the week, but before we get on into them, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor of today's video. They've been on your screen this whole entire time, DraftKings Sportsbook. If you guys are brand new users to DraftKings Sportsbook, and click on the link in the video description or in the pinned comment and bet $5+ 5 or more dollars on any sport pregame money line, you will get $200 in free bets if your bet wins. So since your bet has to win, my best suggestion is to go to college football because those have the longest lines. It's more than likely that those games are more likely to be guaranteed wins. Now, obviously, nothing in sports betting is guaranteed, but my favorite picks in college football this weekend are Tennessee up against Missouri and Michigan up against Nebraska. Tennessee and Michigan, realistically, they should absolutely dumpster both of those teams, so I fully expect Tennessee and Michigan to win. So if you bet $5 on Tennessee money line, you receive $200 in free bets if they win. Obviously, you don't have to tail my picks. You take your favorite NFL team, but that's less likely to be a guaranteed win compared to college football. So make sure you guys do check that out. Again, link in the video description and in the pinned comment. Make sure you guys take advantage of this offer before it disappears. At number 1 of my must-sit wide receivers, it's Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina tonight on Thursday Night Football. Currently the wide receiver, 54.5 PPR points per game. He had a hot start to his rookie campaign. He was coming out looking great. 9.9 points week 1 in half PPR, 20.6 points in week 2, 12.9 in week 3. But after that, just like Humpty Dumpty, everything fell off the wall, right? Very bad. He has failed to eclipse over 6 half PPR points since week 3. Last week up against the Chargers. And the most annoying part is he's getting the targets. 3 receptions, 7 targets, 23 yards, 1 fumble lost. Wide receiver, 70 on the week. And I know, the Panthers defense is awful. Panthers defense is not very good at all. So this is a good matchup for him, right? And while it's a good matchup, people are going to rank him high. They'll be like, oh, he could be a top 30 receiver this week. But he hasn't scored over 6 half PPR points since week fucking 3. It's week 10. It's week 10. And look, I think Marcus Mariota is a decent quarterback. But at the end of the day, London isn't seeing enough targets that are actually catchable for me to feel confident in starting him this week up against the Carolina Panthers. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong because I love Drake London. But ultimately, I feel like I'm going to end up being right. Next up, we got Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos going up against the Atlanta Titans in Tennessee. Currently, the wide receiver, 41.5 PPR points per game, tied with Chris Godwin. Sutton is another player that started the season off incredibly strong, but fell off ever since then. Week 1, 9.2 points. Week 2, 16.2 points, then 13.7 points, then 13.7 points again. After that, 9.9, 2.4, 3.8, 1.8. His last game was week 8 up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London because they were on bye last week. 1 reception on 4 targets for 13 yards. Tennessee ranks 15th in pass DVOA, so this is a pretty average matchup. It's not even the matchup that concerns me here. Like, going into the season, I probably would have loved this matchup up against Tennessee. But now that we've seen 8 games of the Denver Broncos, my confidence has is fucking off. I have zero confidence in Courtland Sutton, and I also fear that with Judy starting to look better, Sutton's value has just plummeted. And again, I just don't feel confident in playing him. The final player of today's video, my final must-sit wide receiver. Let me know down below in the comment section if you guys have any players you want to hear my opinion on. Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the New Orleans Saints. Now, I talked about how much I like George Pickens, right? George Pickens and Kenny Pickett, they have this nice chemistry from working together through OTAs and in training camp, all that. Deontay Johnson continues to get an ass load of targets and does nothing. Wide receiver, 50.5 PPR points per game. This is another scenario where a player starts the season off in a positive manner, but ultimately, I don't even want to read his stats off because it wasn't even as hot as London or Sutton at the beginning of the season. Since week 4, this motherfucker is averaging 6.16 half PPR points per game. The worst part of it, again, he continues to get a high amount of targets, but does nothing with it. He had 9 or more targets in 5 of 8 games this season. His last game was week 8 against the Eagles, because again, they're on bye in that game. 5 receptions on 9 targets for 35 yards. He's seeing 9 targets. He's seeing 10, 11 targets in these games, but he's not doing anything with it. Again, the matchup against New Orleans doesn't even concern me. It's just the fact that Deontay Johnson has been a fucking disaster this season, and I don't feel confident. Like, I don't feel like I should tell you guys to start him, because I love Deontay Johnson in the offseason, because he's just screwed us over too many times in a row. How many times can you play him until you realize that you're just, what's the definition of insanity, right? You keep doing the same thing, doesn't end up working. You want a different outcome. It's always going to be the same outcome. That's what happens with Deontay Johnson. You keep playing him, thinking the outcome's going to change, when in reality, he's just going to do the same shit that he's always done. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you ended up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Make sure you check out DraftKings Sportsbook, link in the video description. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, goodbye!